Hey, this is Jeff Hunt, and today we're going to talk about how much is a website worth. Well, that's a big question to tackle in just 6 minutes, but I'm going to give you my best shot at it. And of course, people will tell you, and you've heard before, that websites are worth, or anything is worth, what someone is willing to pay for it, right? What the market will bear for that asset is what it's worth. And that's partially true, but of course markets have problems. Sometimes they're illiquid, there aren't enough buyers and sellers, so things sell at strange prices. Sometimes there's friction in the market, things like lack of information on the part of buyers or sellers being deceitful, or transaction costs from brokers, or what have you. Those things all impact the value of websites. But of course, what you bring to the table is also really important. It's really a matter of what the website is worth to you. But all of those caveats aside, what I want to try to do is give you a framework for valuing websites, something that you can start with as a process and then make it adjusted to whatever you bring to the table and your ideas about how to value things. So what I use is what I call a risk-based valuation framework. And what that means is simply we start with a market rate for a website, the multiples that most people are willing to pay at a given time for a particular niche and business model. And I take that from the Centurica annual report, where it might tell me, for example, that an e-commerce site is trading at approximately 2.4 times or 2.5 times annual net income in the current year. And so I take a multiple like that, a standard multiple, and then I make adjustments to the multiple. And I called this a risk-based approach because the first step in the process is to really try to identify the risk profile, the risk characteristics of the business that you're looking to buy. So for a website business, those kinds of characteristics will be sort of the fundamental, vital signs of the business. How old is it? So a younger website is going to have a higher risk profile than an older website because younger websites have not stood the test of time. They haven't pushed through when Google's made changes, or Amazon or Facebook have made policy changes that negatively impacted the businesses, or there have been new devices that have come up, so the user behavior has changed, the way users search for things and buy things have changed. Young websites haven't seen those things happen, and you don't have the historical information to know how the site is going to handle those changes, whereas older sites that have demonstrated consistency or growth in the face of those changes give you the perception that they have a much lower risk profile because they've proven themselves in the past. So you look for things like diversification, and diversification in a lot of different categories. For example, in the realm of traffic, if there's a single source of traffic and only one way to get the traffic from that source, then that would be a higher risk than a site that has multiple traffic sources or different ways to get traffic from each of those sources. And you can apply that same methodology to looking at things like revenue. Is there a single source of revenue? Has it been tapped out? Are there multiple sources of revenue? Are there too many sources of revenue? That can be a risk item as well, because managing those things is difficult. And then the area of dependencies. And what I mean by dependencies are very often in businesses, there are things like sort of unnatural dependencies on certain things. For example, maybe there's a dependency on a particular employee or a particular kind of software that was purchased at some point, or maybe a particular vendor or supplier of a product. Those kind of dependencies can be really crucial, and they represent high risk if replacing them or adding to them or changing them in some ways is difficult to do, or impossible to do, or maybe very costly to do. And then those dependencies place the business potentially in a higher risk category. Whereas if those things are easily replaceable or not costly to do so, then those dependencies actually might be beneficial to a particular business. And if it has no dependencies at all, it could be in a much lower risk category. So you get the idea. What you're really trying to do is to take this business to the extent that you can and say, hey, in my analysis, are there risk indicators that make it more risky than an average business, or less risky, or about the same as an average business? And if it's more risky, then the multiple that I'm willing to pay should be lower than whatever the industry average is for that niche, for that business at this time. And if it is less risky than the average business, then probably other people will understand that as well, and the multiple that I would pay is going to be a little bit higher than what I find in that Centurica report. So this is kind of the guts of the process, the fundamentals that you want to do is this risk analysis. Now, beyond that, every website has a different value to a different buyer because of what they bring to the table. So I may have strategic advantages that other people don't have, and I'm not going to automatically offer more money for a website because I have advantages. But if in a kind of competitive environment, competing against other buyers for the same property, I may be willing to raise my maximum price because I know that I bring advantages to the table. And what I mean specifically are things like if I have a business that might have synergy with the one that I'm going to buy. For example, I have an audience and the one I'm going to buy has a product that I could sell to my existing audience, or I bring a product that I can sell to a new audience that I might buy into. That's a strategic advantage that makes this potential business perhaps more valuable or worthwhile to me than another buyer who does not have that strategic advantage. And there are a lot of examples of possible strategic advantages. But in those cases, I might adjust the multiple that I'm willing to pay, the maximum, not the amount that I'm going to offer to begin with necessarily, but I might be willing to pay more because essentially I'm looking for businesses where I do have advantages. Those are the kinds of businesses that I want to buy, but the price that I want to pay is based on the risk profile, the historical performance of the business, the current performance of the business, and not based on the future potential of the business, okay? Because when you start talking about the future, everything gets murkier than when you're talking about the past, right? And a lot of people read into things about the future that they probably should not read in. There are some times that we can do that, like if we identify very, very specific and known improvements. For example, I may know that or have a very strong feeling that I can make a lot more money per 1,000 page views than someone else with a different ad network. Then I might be able to factor that into my rationale. Or if I know for certain that I can sell a particular product at a different price point than it's currently being sold, and I've done the analysis on the volume impact that price change might have, then that gives me a latitude in what I might be willing to pay. But you have to be really cautious with those future ideas and potentials because unless you have lots of expertise in that particular area, you may be wrong about these things. It's possible that the seller's already tested those things and has arrived at the optimal level of whatever they're doing. So that's my best shot at collapsing online business valuation into like 6 or 7 minutes. Hopefully that was helpful to you. I have a tool that you can find at flipmind.com/today and some other items there that might be helpful to your online business. That's what I got for you today. See you next time.